Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled titled "See How Easy It Is Creating SharePoint Workflows Without Programming." Our webinar should run approximately 1 hour, and we will be highlighting the features and functionality of Winshuttle Workflow. Let's quickly run through the agenda of our webinar. First, we will have our introductions. Then we will highlight on leveraging Winshuttle Workflow. Then we will touch on where Winshuttle Workflow is placed and show examples. Then Derek will go through a demonstration of our workflow product. And then we will wrap up answering any questions that you may have. My name is Teresa Wood, and I'm from Adaptive Corporation, and we provide global business process solutions around the SharePoint application. We cover all of North America with global reach in Canada. We have over 100 customers in place and are growing very rapidly, not to mention our delivery and support resources are top ranked in our industry. My partner and co-host today is from our technical division, is Derek Meeting. Derek is one of our principal consultants and has been with the company since its founding. With 12 years of experience in the business process and software consulting industry under his belt, Derek manages the SharePoint Service Business Unit and provides software development, process re-engineering, and system architecture and planning consulting services. Derek has extensive experience in product design and manufacturing industry, including consulting with clients regarding process and regulatory compliance, as well as quality system design and implementation. Together, we want to help you get more value out of what you already have. In the beginning of October, Adaptive Corporation attended the SharePoint conference in Anaheim, California. And the feedback we received was companies wanted to protect their SharePoint investment by sharing and aligning business practices across teams or whole organizations to do more with less and reduce the IT burden, drive down operation costs, measure and improve business performances, improve overall quality of their process and workflows, achieve ROI as quickly as possible, build collaboration amongst locations and teams, and an organization's change becomes more capable. What is Winshuttle Workflow? What can it do? With Winshuttle Workflow, you can enforce virtually any business process with the capabilities to route documents and forms and electronic workflow. Also being able to see at a glance who did what and when. It gives you a timeline of where things are in the process. And from there, you're able to dissect your process and workflow with generated reports and metrics. You can see where any bottlenecks reside and address them. It can decrease work time cycles and increase workplace efficiencies. You can also get your products and services out to market quicker. Winshuttle Workflow provides an efficient, reliable, and cost-effective means to create virtually any type of role-based business process without software coding or consultant. Where does Winshuttle Workflow fit? Winshuttle Workflow fit is a great alternative to developing custom applications, whether you do this in-house or if you're outsourcing it. Winshuttle is a simple option if you are entertaining any engagement with an ERP vendor and hard coding is involved. This could be very costly and time-consuming. Not to mention you can run into any licensing issues. And last, Winshuttle Workflow can give you more flexibility and robust workflows, like being able to perform both serial and parallel business requests. Here's just a list of examples of where we've seen Winshuttle Workflow placed in some of our clients' environments. Some of you can relate to these processes, and keep in mind during our demonstration processes that your company does and that can be automated. And now without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to my technical resource that goes by the name of Derek Meeting. And if you please just give me a minute while we change controls. I will pass it over to him.
All right, Teresa, I've got it. Just give me a second to get my screen all set up. All right, so everybody should be with me. You can see my screen all right, Teresa?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so as Teresa mentioned, we'll go through a demo that'll take us about another 45 or 50 minutes or so. We'll save some time at the end for questions. Now, the phone call is a one-way conversation, so we can't hear you. However, in the GoToMeeting chat window, you can enter questions in there if you would like. Just go ahead and type your questions in. If we have a little stall during the demo, Teresa will ask some of them to me. Otherwise, we'll answer the questions at the end. The kind of way we'll go through the demo today is we'll look at really a couple different things. First, we'll look at Winshuttle from the perspective of an administrator. You know, how do you design a workflow? What are the capabilities? That sort of thing. We'll get into a specific workflow, and we'll look at it from a user's perspective, people that are initiated or participating in the process. And then at the end, we'll even maybe make some changes to the workflow to show you how easy that is and what's involved in making changes to the workflow. So to start with, let's just talk a little bit about what the product is. By the way, Winshuttle was recently rebranded. Its previous name was ShareViz. So through the demo, you may hear me revert to my old habit and use the term ShareViz, or you might see a screenshot or two that has the word ShareViz somewhere on it. Rest assured, it's the same product. It was just rebranded, and I haven't necessarily upgraded all of my components to reflect the new branding. So if you see the word ShareViz or hear me say the word ShareViz, it's the exact same thing as Winshuttle Workflow. So Winshuttle Workflow is an add-on on top of Microsoft SharePoint for workflow purposes. It works on 2007 and 2010 of SharePoint. It also works on all three versions of SharePoint, whether that's the free version. In 2007, we called it WSS. In 2010, we call it Foundation, or whether that's the standard or the enterprise version. The features and functions that you'll see today in the webinar are identical regardless of what version or what flavor of SharePoint that you are on. So everything I'm going to show you, I happen to be running on 2010 Enterprise, but everything I'm doing works the same in 2007, and it also works the same in the free version of SharePoint. The purpose of Winshuttle Workflow is to kind of fill the gap between what you can't do with out-of-the-box tools, whether that's template workflows or SharePoint Designer, and what most people then look to something like Visual Studio to do. So you have these workflows that are too complex to do with SharePoint Designer, but you don't want to go out and hire programmers, or you don't have the programmers, you don't have the staff or the patience to go through a programming effort. That's the gap that Winshuttle fills, is being able to create very complex workflows without any programming. Everything that you do inside of a Winshuttle workflow is stored inside of SharePoint. All interaction to your workflow is through SharePoint. So you can then leverage other parts of SharePoint, like the searching capabilities, the security capabilities, the dashboarding and reporting capabilities. So everything that we do is stored in SharePoint, so we can use those other parts of SharePoint to show a dashboard or reports, or someone wants to run a search and find out how many expense reports were submitted in the last 12 months. They can do all that sort of stuff because all of the data is inside of SharePoint. When we talk about a workflow, there's really two different kinds of workflows that we talk about. Winshuttle has the ability to do both documents-based workflows and forms-based workflows. A documents-based workflow is where you have a file, a Word document, an Excel file, a PDF, whatever, it doesn't matter, and you've added that file to SharePoint, and you now want to route that document through the company for review and approval. And maybe you want to route it different ways. If this guy approves it, go this direction. If he rejects it, go that direction. Maybe at the end of the process, you want to copy it to another location in SharePoint where people have access to it. You want to do revision control. You want to control security, all of those sort of things. That's a documents-based workflow. A forms-based workflow is where we want to route a form. So we don't have a document. We have a web form, and we want the user to fill out information on a web form. We want the participants to review the web form and maybe even add additional information and route that through the company. So those are the two types of workflows that we have, and Winshuttle supports both of those. For the course of this webinar, we will do a forms-based workflow. That's arguably the more complex of the two because you've got not only the workflow engine, but also the forms engine, and so you get to see a little bit more of the features of Winshuttle. So we'll go through that as a forms-based workflow. Now, every workflow that you do in Winshuttle, whether it's a documents-based workflow or a forms-based workflow, has a design, workflow design. You have to set up the rules and the participants and the activities and all that sort of stuff within the workflow. So Winshuttle has a tool called the Designer that allows us to design our workflows. So in this case, I'm going to fire up that tool. Now, the Designer is just a simple flow charting tool. If you have the ability to create a Visio flow chart, you can use this tool. There's not a lot of technical requirements required for using this tool. But when we design our workflows, we have the ability to go through and define all of the different participants as well as all of the activities that those participants have. In some cases, like for example, in this case, you'll notice I've got an activity for a manager here kind of in the middle of the screen. If the manager chooses to approve it, well, then it goes down to HR. However, if he rejects it, well, then it goes over to the right. HR has the same choices, and so on. So we've got the ability to create not only the activities, those are the swim lanes that you see, but also, or I'm sorry, the users, those are the swim lanes, but also the activities, those are the shapes, and then the transitions between the two also allow us to define how this thing is going to flow. So whether we have a forms-based workflow or a documents-based workflow, you're always going to have the workflow component. So we define this workflow component. Now, if it's a forms-based workflow, we then also have a form on top of that. Let me jump over to a tool called InfoPath, and this is what we use to design our forms. Now, InfoPath is not a tool that's created by Winshuttle. InfoPath is part of the Microsoft Office suite. We just leverage InfoPath to design our forms. If you're familiar with InfoPath, it's a pretty powerful tool. It's not a very hard tool to use. If you can create a Word document, you can do layout in a Word document. You know how to insert a table and kind of make things bold and center justified and change fonts. You can probably do most of what you need to do inside of InfoPath. It's a pretty simple tool to use, and being that it's part of the Office suite, it follows all the conventions that all their Office tools do. So we create our form inside of InfoPath, and we can use all of the features and functions of InfoPath. While it is a very simple tool to use, it is also very powerful. There are a lot of very fancy things you can do in InfoPath. For example, you can make fields required. You can make a field visible or hidden, or maybe conditionally hidden. You can have certain fields fill in automatically. For example, the date, we're going to want that to fill in with the current date, and we're going to want a drop-down list that shows a list of departments, all that sort of stuff. So you can do that all inside of InfoPath. Now, in addition to being able to use standard InfoPath functionality, Winshuttle has also added some additional functionality to InfoPath. If you look at the right-hand side of my screen, you will notice that I've opened up the controls toolbox for InfoPath, and at the top are all of the standard InfoPath controls. But down at the bottom, under this section called Custom, you see a bunch of controls that are prefixed with the word ShareViz. These are all controls that Winshuttle has added to InfoPath to make difficult InfoPath tasks easier, or in some cases, impossible InfoPath tasks possible. So over the years, Winshuttle has seen where their customers have had things that are just too difficult to do in InfoPath, but yet it's a very common thing. So Winshuttle would write a custom control and now make that available to their end users. Well, what do some of these custom controls do? Let's just talk about a couple of them. There's 19 of them, but we'll just talk about 2 of them real quick. There's one, it's called the form name control. Now, you would think InfoPath, being a forms-based tool, would have the ability to just generate a non-intelligent sequential number. Just give me a 6-digit number and throw it in this field and move on. Well, it doesn't. And that's something that a lot of people need. When they're creating an electronic form, they want that form to have some sort of uniqueness, so they want it to have just a non-intelligent sequential number. So in the past, people would either write JavaScript or they would do .NET code in order to create their own little tool to do this. That's a lot of work, and it's a very common thing. Winshuttle wrote a tool called the form name control. If I put this on my form, which I already have one on there, and you'll see it in a minute, it just gives me a counter. And I can define whether I want that to be a 6-digit counter, a 5-digit counter. Maybe I want to prefix it with like a 4-digit year or a 2-digit year, whatever you want to do. But I don't have to do any programming. I simply say, give me a 6-digit counter and take the results and throw them in this field. And that's all there is to it. Another area, another control that we use frequently is called the query control. So InfoPath has built-in capabilities to query a SharePoint list, SQL Server, or an Access database. But we had a lot of customers that needed to query things that were not one of those three. They needed to query an Oracle database. Well, then they had to write .NET code. Well, Winshuttle created the query control. All I do is drop that control on my form, and I just define the connection string, and I define the SQL statement I want to run, and it will go out and run the query for me to any database, not just SQL Server. When the results of that query come back, if there's multiple results that come back, I can throw them into a repeating table or into a drop-down list, or if a single result comes back, I can throw it into a text field. And I don't have to do any programming. I simply say run the SQL statement and take the result and put it here. Now, in this case, I'm going to use the query control to query something other than Oracle. I'm going to query Active Directory. So you'll notice on our form, we have a field which is requested by. Once I get the guy's name, I'm going to want to get his title and his phone number, and those are going to come out of Active Directory. And I'm going to use that query control to do that. So in addition to querying databases, it can also query Active Directory. So you don't have to use these controls inside of InfoPath, but most of our customers do because they make InfoPath form design even easier. So you can use all the tools that InfoPath brings to the table, and then you can use the enhancements that Winshuttle brings to the table to make your form design even easier and better. As I mentioned, there's 19 different custom controls. We only have time to go through a couple of them. But if you ran into a struggle with doing something inside of InfoPath, let us know. Maybe one of these custom controls is something that will make your form design even better. So there's the back end of what a Winshuttle workflow looks like. You've got the form, you've got the workflow, you wire the two up, you publish them into SharePoint, and now you're up and running and you can start to use the process. Let's switch hats now and talk about how users and process participants actually use Winshuttle workflow. So as a user, I'm logged in as someone who has authority to be in SharePoint. Winshuttle, by the way, does not have a security engine. We use SharePoint security engine. So we don't have to define users and access. You just do all that through SharePoint, and then the users are controlled by what they can see and what they can do based on native SharePoint security. So I'm logged in as a user, and I want to kick off a new employee hire request. So there's this guy we want to onboard, and in order to do that, he needs to go through an interview process, a drug screening, he needs to get set up on the network, and so on. And so I want to go through the process of kicking off that workflow so that that can happen. There's a number of different ways that you can kick off a Winshuttle workflow. The easiest way, and probably the most common way that our customers do it, is through a hyperlink. So I jumped over to the HR site, and I've got a hyperlink on that site, and it says click here to start a new employee hire request. That's just a good old-fashioned hyperlink. You could have that in your favorites. You could send an email out to people with a hyperlink on it, and they could click on the hyperlink, and it would kick off the process. It's just a good old-fashioned hyperlink. So in this case, I've got a hyperlink at the HR site. Of course, in order for Mike to be able to access this hyperlink, he needs authority to the HR site, so we would set that up through SharePoint security. So assuming he has that authority, he can now go in there, and he clicks on that hyperlink. That form that we saw just a moment ago inside of InfoPath is now going to be displayed inside of my browser. Now you remember at the beginning I mentioned that Winshuttle works on even the free version and the standard version of SharePoint. You do not need Enterprise. And if you're seeing a web-based form, you may wonder, how do we do that? Because typically, when you want to display an InfoPath form as a web page in SharePoint, you need Microsoft Form Server. Microsoft Form Server is only available on the Enterprise version of SharePoint. Winshuttle does not use Microsoft Form Server to display their forms. They use their own form server. The benefit there is we can now do web-based InfoPath forms for people that are not on the Enterprise version of SharePoint. There's no additional cost. It's all built right into Winshuttle. So the only thing you need is a browser. Once Winshuttle is installed and configured, the only thing you need is a browser, and now we can do web-based forms. We've had some customers that have had significant cost savings because of that. They've been using SharePoint either at the standard level or at the foundation, the free version, and they wanted to now start to enhance SharePoint to do web-based forms. Well, their only option was to upgrade to the Enterprise version of SharePoint. And if you have many thousands of users, that can be very expensive. So they looked to Winshuttle to answer that question. They were able to stay on the version of SharePoint that they have, but by using Winshuttle, they can now get web-based forms. So that's no small item that you have the ability to do that. It's a very neat, makes the product very capable. So here's our form. A couple things you'll notice. Remember that form name control that generated the counter for us? You'll see that up there in the corner. So there's where I got my number from. InfoPath has the ability to throw in the current date, so I threw that in there. This is another Winshuttle control, which is called the current user control. I threw that in the form also. That gives me the ability to go out and get the current user's either first name, last name, his login name, or his email address and throw it on the form, In this case, I got his display name and threw it on the form. From that, I ran a query to Active Directory to get his title and to get his phone number. So all that information came from a live connection to Active Directory. And then down at the bottom, I've got all the information that the guy needs to fill out. Now, some of these fields are required, and if I try to submit this process without filling in a required field, Winshuttle would let me know that I need to perform some additional operations because this does not pass validation. And if I click OK on that, it will highlight what fields are missing. So it doesn't allow me to submit a process that's missing information. We've found in many cases when you look at somebody's process and you're looking at trying to improve a process, oftentimes as you interview participants of that process and you ask them where much of their time is spent, a lot of time it's gathering information that should have already been provided. So the person maybe can't process an expense report because no receipts were attached. Or they can't process an expense report because it's got an airfare on it and there's no travel authorization attached. So if we can prevent users from submitting things without the appropriate data, we can actually right there improve our process. So there's no way for me to submit this process without giving the bare minimum information. And it tells me what information that is. So we want to fill in his name, John.Doe. We'll give him a title, Senior Purchasing Agent. And then we'll pick the department that he's going to work in. Now, by the way, that list of departments, if I jump back over to this location in SharePoint, you'll notice I've got a list of all of the departments in my company, as well as the corresponding manager for each department. So I just got a SharePoint list out there that has all departments and all managers. Maybe you want to query Active Directory. It doesn't matter, but I'm just showing you where I'm getting my list from. And so you'll notice that when I pick a particular department, like customer service, the corresponding manager shows up in the manager field. That's important because you'll remember if we go back to that workflow, remember we had a swim lane called manager? Well, who is the manager? Who's going to perform the activities in the swim lane called manager? Well, it depends, doesn't it? If we're hiring someone into one department, it's one manager. If we hire him into another department, it's another manager. So when we define the workflow, we don't have to hard code users in there. Instead, we hard code activities and roles, and then at runtime, we can dynamically determine who's going to fill those roles. So in this case, depending on the department that you select, you're going to get a different manager. In this case, we'll select purchasing, and the manager for purchasing is Alice. So when this is routed, it should go to Alice. If I try to submit the process now, you can see I get one more error, and that error says that I have to attach a resume. So once again, we're trying to enforce the business rules so that we don't submit processes that are missing information. So this idea of attaching a resume, this is another one of those Winshuttle controls inside of InfoPath. The ability to have an attachment on a form and the ability to enforce that that attachment has to be there. So remember at the beginning we talked about documents-based processes and forms-based processes? This is almost like a hybrid between the two. It's a forms-based process, but it has a document attachment as well. So in addition to the user seeing the form when they go to review and approve or reject this, they're also going to be able to see the attachment, which in this case is going to be a PDF file. So I went out there and grabbed a PDF file for John Doe's resume. I've got some buttons down at the bottom. These buttons, by the way, can be made to say whatever you want, and they can be located. You don't even have to have all of the buttons on here. It may be that you don't need the cancel button. You think that's just confusing and causes too many problems, so you want to delete it. Maybe the term save and route doesn't mean anything to you. You want to use the term submit. And you want the button in the upper left-hand corner, not the lower right. That's fine. You can do whatever you want when it comes to that. We'll go ahead and hit the save and route button, which is going to kick this process off. So now what's happening is all of the data that I filled out in that form is being added to SharePoint. There's a SharePoint list out there. It's called Employee Hire, I believe. Yeah, there it is. There's a SharePoint list called New Employee Hire. And it's adding all the information to that list. So all of the information about who we are hiring and what department and you know, the manager and all that sort of stuff has been added. Then it creates an assignment for the next user in the process. Now, how does a user find out that they have an activity to do? Well, there's a number of different ways that someone can see that they have an activity to do. Probably the most common way is right through email. So when you design the workflow, you can specify whether or not you want to send out emails to people to let them know they have an assignment to do. The default is yes, and most of our customers leave that on because usually you want to be notified by email that you have an assignment to do. So in this case, if I go check my email, we should see that Alice gets an assignment to do. So a new email just showed up. And if we look at the email, Notice the body says, Dear Alice Nelson, a new employee hire request has been initiated by Mike Brady. It says the employee is for the purchasing department and so on. The entire body of this email is fully customizable. You can make it say whatever you want. The subject line is customizable. You can make these hyperlinks say different things. If you don't want to display the history at the bottom, you can turn that off. You can do whatever you want with this email here. So that's one way that Alice can see that she has an assignment to do. Let me log in as Alice and show you a couple other ways that she can see that she has an assignment to do. So I'm going to log into SharePoint as Alice, and you'll notice I've got this dashboard down at the bottom called the task list. This task list also shows that I have an assignment to do. So here's another place you can see. It's the same assignment. It's just being displayed in different places. This task list is kind of a nice little dashboard. It gives you actually a little more ability, and we'll talk about that as we get further on into the demo. If you've been using SharePoint workflow before, you're familiar with the good old-fashioned SharePoint task list. And so we throw an item in there as well. So if users are used to using the SharePoint task list, they can see they have an assignment to do in there as well. So any of those places that a user can see that they have an assignment to do. Again, the most common is probably email. Right in the email, we can have a hyperlink, and the user can click on that hyperlink. It will open up their browser and take them in process to their assignment. The beauty of this is if someone is not real familiar with SharePoint, they don't know how to navigate and go find an activity and open the activity and choose to complete the task and all that sort of stuff, they just click on the hyperlink in the email. If they're taken right in process to their activity, down at the bottom we've got our approve and reject buttons, so we can do whatever we need to do here. Now, by the way, the form, you'll notice, looks a little different than it did a moment ago. Previously, our form was a completely read-write form. So I could type in the first and last name. I could pick a department from the drop-down. I was able to upload a resume. Now the form is a read-only view of the form. So Winshuttle gives us the ability to create different views of the form inside of InfoPath and then assign those views to different activities. So I've said for the manager, we don't want to give them a read-write view of the form. I don't want them changing things. They're supposed to just review what has already been submitted, and so we give them a read-only view of the form. Maybe other people in the process, you want to give them a view of the form that shows fields that you didn't show to people previously. You'll see that in just a couple minutes. So this is a real nice way to create what we call a task-based user interface. It would have been silly to show the manager a view of the form that had information that maybe IT had to enter. The manager doesn't know the answer to those questions, so why would we show those fields? So when you do that, you create a kind of a less than intuitive interface. The user doesn't know, am I supposed to fill that out, or is someone later on going to fill that out? Of course, you can't make the field required, because if it's required, then the user has to fill it out, but meanwhile, he doesn't know what goes in there because it's someone else's job to fill it out. So you end up making it optional, which means people don't forget to fill it out, which means that there's data missing. So this idea of having a single user interface for every user causes lots of problems. In this case, we create a different form for each user in the process, a different view of the form, I should say, for each user in the process, each activity, and then they can see things a little differently. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and approve this. Again, there's our buttons down at the bottom. Once again, you can make these buttons say whatever you want. You can locate them however you want. In this case, we're going to approve this. It's going to send it to the next person in the process, who is the person in HR. So the process, if I go back, by the way, to that task list I had a moment ago, you'll notice it's now blank. So previously, Alice saw that she had an activity to do. That task is now out of there. If I go back to the good old-fashioned SharePoint task list, you'll notice that the task has been removed from there as well because it's now completed. If, by the way, Alice wanted to see where this activity was, maybe it's a couple weeks later and she's curious as to what's going on with that process. Is it done yet? She can go in and she can look at the history. She can pull up the history and it'll show her what the history is, or maybe she wants to look at the form. She can do that as well. So all of that information based on SharePoint security, of course, Alice would need permission to be able to see this information, but assuming she has that permission, she can go in and she can look at the history and all that sort of stuff. All right, let's check our email to see who the next person in the process is. A new email should show up, and sure enough, it does. And this email is for a person by the name of Carol, and it's for the HR approval task. So a new email is shown up for HR approval for Carol. By the way, down at the bottom of the email, as soon as you see it there, you'll notice that the history is continuing to build. So that history is continuing to be updated. This history is being stored in SharePoint as well. So every time a user does an activity, we write an entry to a list that has that information in there. Now, why do I mention that? Well, it's important because if the information is in SharePoint, look at the cool things you can do with it. If I go to the HR site, I've got a key performance indicator that shows me how are we performing on new employee hire requests? What is the average amount of time it takes managers or HR people or IT people to complete their activity? This is a live connection to that history list, and so anytime someone does their activity, this information is going to get updated. So just make a mental note that right now, on average, it takes HR 4 days. That's going to change in just a minute. On average, it takes IT somewhere greater than a day because it's currently shown in the yellow status. You're going to see this change. So as I do my activities, Winshuttle is putting new information in the history list. This key performance indicator is based on that list. So at any given time, someone with permission can come in and look and see how we're performing. We had one customer that used this for expense reports. They created a dashboard where every time an expense report got approved, they were able to look at their dashboard and see the total amount of money that their department has spent on, for example, travel expenses or software and hardware expenses. But every time someone approved an expense report, it got updated, and they used built-in SharePoint capabilities to create a dashboard to do that. So that history is kind of nice for the ability to do that. Let's log in now as the next user. That's Carol. So when Carol logs in, again, if she goes back to her home page, we see that little dashboard, and Carol's got the item in her dashboard. Of course, she also has the hyperlink right inside the email. So if she wanted to click on the hyperlink inside the email, she could do that as well, and she could go into that right from there. In this case, the dashboard, let's talk a little bit about that, because this dashboard is kind of useful for other things. You'll notice it shows more information than just what assignment I have. It shows, for example, the due date. We'll talk about due dates in a couple minutes. It shows the name of the task. You can actually customize this to have any column you want be displayed in here. So maybe you're doing expense reports and you wanted a column that showed the total amount of the expense. And so now if I log in and I have 15 different expense reports to approve, I could see which ones were the larger expense reports and which ones were the smaller ones. I can even click on the column heading, and that way it's sorted either ascending or descending, and maybe I want to work on the more expensive expense reports first and work my way down. So this dashboard is kind of nice for those sort of things as well. If you want to use it, you can use that. In this case, Carol will click on her assignment, which opens up her web form, and she can now begin to work on it. Now you'll notice that, of course, Carol is the HR person, so the web form that she sees looks different than the web form that the originator saw and the web form that the manager saw. So the top half of the form looks much the same, but down at the bottom we've added some new fields because these are information that the purchasing person needs to enter. So they need to enter the dates for interviews and start dates and all that sort of stuff. So we'll go through and do that. We'll say that this person was interviewed on the 1st. We'll say they did their drug screening on the 3rd. The employee agreement was signed on the 4th, and we'll make their start date be December 1st. So all that information is filled in. Another checkbox over here, probationary review required. You can make your web forms be very intuitive. So keep your eye down in the lower right-hand corner underneath start date here. You'll notice it's currently blank. If I check on that box, a new field appears. And that field is, well, what is the date of the probationary review? I've defaulted it to be the start date plus 90 days. You can change it if you want, but I just had it default to the start date plus 90 days. So if you check that box, a new field appears. So it would be silly to show that field if the review wasn't required. So we only show the field if the review is required. So it gives, again, a user interface that's very intuitive. We can have things that are required, optional, visible, hidden, conditionally required, conditionally visible, so you can make your form be a little bit more intuitive. We'll leave that at that date of 2/29. Just kind of make a mental note of that date. That's going to come back in a couple minutes. We'll look at why that date's important. We'll go ahead and approve this and send it off to the last person in the process. So the last person in the process is the IT guy. Let's check our email. And a new email shows up for a guy by the name of Bobby. And so let's go check out Bobby's assignment. We'll log in as Bobby. And when Bobby logs in, there's that dashboard down at the bottom with the task list. Now remember I mentioned that this dashboard can do more than just show you have an assignment. You'll notice it's also starting to do some color coding for us. So previously our assignments had a white background. Now this one's got a yellow background. There are one of three colors that will display: white, yellow, or red. And what that indicates is how critical is the assignment. White means that you've got some time. Red means that it's already overdue, and yellow means it's about to go overdue. So in this case, you'll notice Bobby has a due date of tomorrow. Actually, it's less than 24 hours away. And because it's less than 24 hours away, we show that as yellow. By the way, the 24 hours, that's up to you. You determine what that threshold is. Maybe you want to show your assignments as yellow when they're 72 hours from expiring, or maybe 12 hours from expiring. That's up to you. You set that threshold, whatever you want it to be. In my case, it's 24 hours. So when I created this workflow, I gave this task a particular duration. And now it does color coding based on that duration. Let me show you a little bit more about that duration. If we go into the workflow designer, I've picked the IT configuration activity down there, that blue square in the lower left. If you look at the upper right, you will notice there is a property where I set the duration. And in this case, you can see it's set to 1 day. That's why he has 24 hours to work on it. And because my threshold of turning it yellow was 24 hours, basically the minute he gets it, it's going to be yellow because he's only got 24 hours to work on it, and the threshold is 24 hours. The people before him, their background was white. Well, why was that? Well, if we look up at HR, you'll notice their duration was not 1 day, but 2 days. So if we would have sat here till tomorrow, their activities would have turned yellow tomorrow because they had 48 hours to work on it, and our threshold for turning it yellow was 24 hours. So that's one thing that that duration does, is it does the color coding that's on that particular dashboard. The other thing the duration is used for is for sending out reminder and past due emails. So down here at the bottom, you'll notice a couple properties, which is whether or not to send a reminder email and whether or not to send a past due email. Let's talk about past due emails first. Those are pretty easy. Basically, using the duration, Winshuttle will know when an activity goes past due. When the activity goes past due, Winshuttle will send an email to the person letting them know that their assignment is past due. So not only does the user get the email when they get the assignment, those are the emails that you've been seeing me get throughout the demo, but they also get an email once it goes past due. Additionally, we can send out continuous emails after it goes past due. So maybe every 4 hours. So you're going to send them an email when it goes past due, then every 4 hours thereafter you continue to send them an email to let them know that they have something to do. Additionally, long before it goes past due, we can send them a reminder email. The reminder email will go out before it goes past due to let someone know that they have an assignment that is about to go past due. And again, you decide what threshold they go out. What does about mean? Does it mean 12 hours, 24 hours, 6 days? You decide that. So the user gets an email when they get the assignment. If they don't do anything, they get an email sometime later that reminds them. If they still don't do anything, they get an email once it expires. And if they still don't do anything, they continue to get those overdue emails letting them know that they have an assignment to do. So that duration is not only used for color coding, it's also used for the emails that go out. Finally, we can choose to reroute a process if it stays, if the user doesn't act on it over some period of time. So we can give them their duration and then a grace period on top of that. And then if they still don't act on it, we can route it to someone else, route it to a manager, route it to a colleague. Maybe we just route it around them altogether. You can decide how the routing works. But it will automatically escalate if they don't work on it in a particular period of time. So that's what all that duration is about. So let's talk about what's going to happen once IT gets done with their activity. Well, first of all, we'll open up the IT activity. So there's the form that IT sees. And once again, you'll notice that the form looks a little different than it did previously. We've removed, for example, the resume. We removed the dates that HR filled out. Maybe there's confidential information, a social security number, a starting salary, or a phone number that you don't want to share with everybody, so you can remove that information. And we've given IT fields that are specific to IT. So we'll do things like his network username. And then I use some InfoPath concatenation to create an email address. We'll give them a phone extension. So that's everything that we need to fill out. Now I've got a button down at the bottom to continue. By the way, remember previously our button said approve and reject. You can have your button say whatever you want. In this case, we don't want to give IT the ability to approve or reject it. They don't really approve new hires. They just do the work and then tell us when they're done doing the work. So that's why it just says continue. You can have the button say whatever you want, and you don't need to just have 1 or 2 responses, just approve or reject. You can have 10 different responses, and you can route it differently based on any of the 10 buttons the guy clicks. So when I click that continue button, let's look and see what's going to happen. So we're currently sitting at this blue node down here in the lower right. It's going to go into this little purple square, which is called finalize new hire. This is just a sub-process. I kind of just designed it this way to make it look nice. And it's going to do a couple different things. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to update a calendar. So if I take a look at SharePoint and I go to my HR site, you will notice that I've got a calendar that shows me all of the dates that new employees are starting. Notice the 1st is currently blank, but our guy is going to be starting on the 1st. So that's what that plugin is going to do, is it's going to put an entry in this calendar to show that our guy is starting on that date. So we'll see that in a minute. Next thing that happens is, remember we attached his resume. We want to store that resume in SharePoint. So I've got in the HR site, I've got a place where I store resumes. It's a library called Resumes. If I open up that library, you will notice that currently there are 3 resumes in there. There's not one for John Doe. When this is all said and done, Winshuttle will take the resume off of the form and copy it into this library. The next thing that's going to happen is an Active Directory account is going to be created. Now, I'll tell you right now, during the demo, we really can't see that. It does take some time for that to process because there's a bunch of checking that goes on. But we use PowerShell to go out and execute an Active Directory command to create an Active Directory account for the user. Then there's a notification that needs to be sent out. Now, this notification, based on the routing, you can see it only gets sent out if that box probationary review required was checked. And in our case, we did check it. So this notification is going to go out. And who's the notification going to go to? Well, because it's in the manager swim lane, it's going to go to the manager. And in the case of our process, our manager was Alice. So it's going to go to Alice. Now, the email is going to say the following. A probationary review is required for, and then it's got his name in there, John Doe, it should say. Please click the link below to initiate the process, and there's a big old hyperlink down at the bottom. This email is very easy to type. If you want to use values from the form, like, for example, the guy's name, you simply right-click, and you get all of the values from your form. So I could do something like he started on, and then I want to put his start date in there. I could right-click and choose start date. And it would say he started on, what, 12/1/2011. So these emails are very easy to create. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this email in a couple minutes, but here's the neat thing about this. This email isn't going to go out today. Notice over here on the right-hand side, I've got this thing called a send delay. I'm going to send this email out in the future. Remember when we checked that box, probationary review required, we filled in a date, and the date we filled in, I think, was 2/29. This email will actually go out on 2/29. So in the future, Alice will be sitting there at her computer, and an email is going to show up. And it's going to say, hey, don't forget, you got to fill out a probationary review for John Doe, and by the way, here's a hyperlink. If you click on it, you can go right into the review and fill it out. So when the demo is all said and done, I'm going to go change the date of my computer, and you'll see that email show up. But we'll do that at the very end because when I change the date, it kind of screws up some other things, so I need to kind of save that for the end. So those are all of the things that are going to happen. The last thing that happens is an email gets sent out to the originator, and that email is what we're calling an approval notification. So if I go into Winshuttle, I can look at that email. It's going to basically say, we're pleased to inform you that the new employee hire request for, and then it should throw his name in there, has been approved, blah, 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 and you can see all the information that it fills in. So that's everything that's going to happen as soon as Bobby clicks on the complete button. So let's do that. Bobby's got his information filled in. He hits the continue button, and let's watch this thing roll. So the first thing that was supposed to happen was a new entry got entered into the HR calendar to show the start date of John Doe. So as soon as this is done, we'll jump over to the HR calendar and look and see if that took place. Okay, that looks done. Jump over to the HR site. We've got our calendar. December 1st is currently blank. I'm going to hit my F5 key to refresh, and now voila, there is an entry on December 1st. Notice new purchasing employee John Doe starts today. So it was able to grab information off the form like his department, the start date, as well as his name, kind of put it all together and create this entry in a SharePoint calendar. Oh, by the way, did you notice our key performance indicator has updated? So remember IT before showed as yellow, and HR was averaging 4 days. Now they're down to 3. So you can see all this information is getting updated because we completed the process in just a couple minutes, so everything improved a little bit on our key performance indicators. Next thing that was supposed to happen was a resume was supposed to show up in the resume library. If I jump over to the resume library, there are 3 resumes in there right now. If I hit the F5 key to refresh, you see that John Doe's resume appeared in that library now as well. So now we've got John Doe's resume on file. Someone didn't have to remember to put John Doe's resume, to email it to someone. They didn't have to remember to print it out and put it in a file cabinet. So long as you attach it to the form, and remember, you can't submit the form unless you attach it. Once it's approved, it ends up here. So automatically, I can guarantee you that for everybody that we've hired through this process, we've got their resume on file. The next thing that was supposed to happen, again, we can't look at the Active Directory thing because that takes some time. You'll just have to believe me that through PowerShell we do that. The next thing that was supposed to happen was the originator was to get an email that says that we're happy to tell you that John Doe has been hired. So let's go and check our email. And a new email shows up. Let me slow down a little bit so your screens can catch up. And it says, we're pleased to inform you that the new employee hire request for John Doe and so on, everything like we saw, it should say, it says that in the email. You'll also notice that I included in the email a couple attachments. So you can turn on or off whether or not you want some attachments. One of the attachments is a copy of the form. So we basically created a screenshot of the form and thrown it in there. The other attachment is the resume. So you don't have to include those attachments, but you can turn that on or off if you want to include attachments inside of the emails that go out to people. So in this case, we got that turned on. All right. So it looks like the web meeting has slowed down a little bit. Well, hopefully it catches up here. So that's kind of the gist of, we'll look at these other things as the screen catches up a little bit. That's kind of the gist of what you get out of the Winshuttle workflow. So without any programming, we were able to do all of this. And keep in mind some of the things we did with the different form views, querying Active Directory, updating calendars and document libraries with information from the form, connecting to Active Directory to create new users, and all that sort of stuff is able to be done through the Winshuttle workflow, and all of that is done without programming. Now, by the way, Winshuttle does have a programming engine, so it does have an API. We do have customers every now and again that want to do something, maybe connect Winshuttle to another business system, and that business system doesn't support web services, for example. Well, you can use the Winshuttle API to do that programming. So it's not that you can't do programming, it's just that you generally don't need to do programming. Instead, you can do everything with the out-of-the-box capabilities of Winshuttle. All right, so before we wrap up and answer any questions, once again, it looks like the webinar has kind of slowed down a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about what is involved in creating these processes. The process that you just saw that I did, the form as well as the workflow, just to give you an idea of level of effort, that is probably about 2 days worth of work. And that, by the way, included a lot of testing to connect to Active Directory and all that sort of stuff. But the point is, you can create some pretty complex workflows in really a matter of a couple hours. Had I not had to do any testing, had I already had defined what my process was going to look like, the actual amount of work that's involved in there is probably more like 4 or 5 hours, with the additional time being kind of trial and error and trying to figure out how to get things to work and that sort of thing. So in just a handful of hours, you can create that sort of process. In fact, if you want to make a change to a process, let's go through and do that real quick. We'll make a quick change to a process. Looks like the webinar has kind of caught back up with us. Let's just make a change where we want to change how the routing in this process works. Now, it's currently 1:48 Eastern Time. So we'll just kind of mark that because we're going to see how long it takes us to make a fairly significant change to this process. If you remember, the form that we had a checkbox on it that said whether or not the employee would have access to confidential and or financial data. We want to use that checkbox. So in other words, if the user is going to have access to that sort of data, we want to route it differently than if he doesn't have access. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a new swim lane. We have a new participant. We want to route it to an executive if the guy has access to that confidential information. So I'm going to open up Winshuttle's swim lane editor, and I'm going to create a new swim lane. So here's all of our current swim lanes: originator, manager, HR, IT, and so on. Let's add a new one, and we're going to call this one executive. And we're going to decide how we want the executive to be assigned. Now, there are 12 different ways you can decide to assign users. You can hard code users. You can do things like you saw me do earlier, where we look at a SharePoint list, and based on the department that was selected, we pick the manager. You can do Active Directory queries. You can query web services. There's 12 different ways to do that. For the case of this demo, I'm just going to hard code Ed Phillips in there. In production, you would probably never hard code a guy in there, but for the demo, this will work. So we'll hard code Ed Phillips in there. Now we have a new swim lane called executive. We need to give the executive an assignment to do. So let's throw an activity down there. We'll give it a name, not approval 25. We'll call it executive review. And then we need to define the routing. So from the start node, it goes to the executive. So we'll draw a line from there to there. All I'm doing is just clicking and dragging. And then once the executive renders his decision, if he approves it, it goes up to the manager. And if he rejects it, it goes to the same place that all the other rejections go over here, and an email will eventually get sent out. So there's our routing. Now, we need to put some conditions on the routing because we don't want it to go to this place all the time. So in other words, it only goes to the executive if that checkbox confidential was checked. So I'm going to go in and add a new condition. If I right-click, I can get all the fields for my form. There's a field called confidential. If that equals true, true, it will go down this path. And then we need to put the alternate condition on this path, which is if that equals false, or Winshuttle has kind of a catch-all function, which is called otherwise, and I'm going to put that on that path. Then if he approves it, it goes up this way. So let's right-click on that transition and say approved. And if he rejects it, it goes this way. So we'll right-click there and say rejected. So there's all of our conditions. Let's do a couple more things for this executive because now our executives happen to travel quite a bit. So they're not always in the office. So first of all, we need to give him a duration of something greater than 1 day because he's not going to get this done in 1 day. We'll give him 3 days to work on his process. Now, our executives also aren't always sitting in front of the corporate network. So we want him the ability to either approve or reject this process right through email. So notice this setting, email approval. Let's go ahead and set that to true. And then because he's going to be doing this through email, this item, include item, we want to set that to true as well. That way when he gets his email, it will have the attachment so he knows what he's approving or rejecting. So I think that is everything. Let's go ahead and send our changes up to the server. It does some verification to make sure everything's good, and then it will allow us to actually use this process. So far we're 4 minutes into it. We've added a new activity. We've added a new swim lane. We've turned on email approval and added the conditions for when it goes one direction versus another direction. So all that so far in 4 minutes. Let's jump over to our site here, close these other ones out, go back to HR, and we're going to click on another new employee hire request. So the form, we didn't change the form. The form doesn't look any different than it did before. So we're logged in as Bobby right now. Bobby's going to see the same form that Mike saw a couple minutes ago. We'll fill in some information. We're going to hire Jane Doe, and we'll make her an engineer. We'll hire her into the engineering department. Now, Mike is the manager of engineering. But if I check this box, instead of going to Mike, it should go to Ed, right? Because we said that they have access to confidential information. Let me attach Jane's resume. And let's hit the button to send it. And because that box is checked, instead of going to Mike, it should go to Ed. So we'll see if that happens. Now, we can go in and check our email. Let me delete this one that's already in there. Let's go check our email. And this email will take a couple seconds to show up because it has to do some more work than it had to do previously because it's including a copy of the form. So the fact that it's taking a while indicates to me that it's working. Notice that this went to not Mike, but notice Ed Phillips. There's a copy of the form attached. So Ed is sitting there. He's on his Android phone or his iPhone. He gets this email. He looks at the attachment and he says, oh, yeah, I remember talking about hiring Jane Doe into the engineering department. He takes a look at her resume. He's happy with it. So down in the email, now he's not logged into SharePoint. He's all on his phone or his tablet or whatever it is. And the email, there's a hyperlink, click here to approve. So Ed clicks on it and he says, looks good to me, Ed. And he hits send. So the next time his phone syncs up, this email will get sent out and go to our server. Our server will receive that email, and it will actually render the approval on behalf of Ed. So let me jump back into SharePoint. Let's sign in as a different user real quick. And when I go in and look at that process, process number 57, if I take a look at the history of it, let's see what we got here. Bobby kicked it off. Then he sent it to Ed. Ed approved it. He typed some comments. Looks good to me. We record the fact that Ed did that via email, and now it's currently sitting with Mike. So I would argue that's a pretty significant change. We're now at 1:54, so it's taken us 6 minutes to go through and add a new participant, add a new activity, utilize a field on the form to do dynamic routing, route this way if it's checked, route that way if it's not checked, send out an email that includes hyperlinks that allows the guy to do approve and reject right through his email, and wherever he gets that email, whether that's his tablet or his phone or his computer. We did all that in just a couple minutes. So that kind of illustrates just how easy it is to do some of these things inside of Winshuttle. Very last thing before I turn it over to Teresa is you'll remember that we've got that email that's supposed to be sent out on February 29th. So let's change the date of our computer, and we'll go out to, we'll just go out to March 1st. March 1st, choose OK. Now, Alice is sitting there. It's March 1st, and Alice is sitting there in her email. She even forgets that she hired John Doe 90 days ago. He's working out so well. And she's checking her email, and all of a sudden an email shows up. That's not the one. That's the one from Mike. Hold on. An email will show up to Alice to let her know that she has to perform the probationary review for John Doe. Give me just a second. Sometimes it takes a minute for that email to show up. There it is. So she gets her email. It doesn't have to do anything. She's not monitoring any process. She's not going back and remembering to check and that sort of thing. The email just shows up, and when the email shows up, it says, oh, that's a past due email. That's not the right one. There it is. So those are those past due emails, by the way. So those showed up for the assignment that's currently out there with Mike. A probationary review is required for John Doe. Please click the link below to initiate the review process. It showed up on 3/1. We've also included a copy of the form in the resume just in case she didn't even remember anything about John Doe. So she clicks on the review. Now this review, by the way, happens to be a Winshuttle workflow as well. So when she clicks on that, it takes her into Winshuttle, opens up a new review form. It fills in some information for us. So for example, it filled in the employee name, the department, the start date. So remember, John Doe started on 12/1, so it filled that information in. And then she goes through and she says yes, and gives him his rating and all that sort of stuff, and she hits the button to kick the thing off. But the point is, Alice isn't sitting there monitoring some system or looking at sticky notes on her computer monitor to remind her, don't forget to do John Doe's probationary review. Instead, long ago when we hired John Doe, we sent a tickler out there and said, send this thing out on the 29th of February, and then Alice will get the email. And because the review process is also a Winshuttle workflow, she just clicks on a hyperlink, and she has the process, and she can go through and fill this thing out. So hopefully that illustrates to you some of the capabilities of Winshuttle workflow and some of the things that you can do with the product. This demo probably shows you about 20% of what it can do. There's quite a bit it can do. So what we like to do is if you have any specific questions, we'd be happy to take those. Sometimes our customers want to see something in action. So maybe they have a challenge that they're facing. They actually want us to kind of demo how it would work in Winshuttle. We'd be happy to do that for you as well. With that, back to you, Teresa.
Thanks, Derek. Great job. And while we're switching presenters so everybody can see my screen, please write any questions that you guys have right now provided in the chat box display in the meeting window, and we can start going through those. Okay, we have our first question, Derek, while we're switching screens over. How is Winshuttle workflow licensed? Per user? Question mark?
It's unlimited user, so it's per server. So there are two pricing models. One model allows you to buy a per process. So if you say, you know what, I just need to fix my expense report problem. Well, then you buy a license for a single process, which is an expense report, but it's unlimited user. The other license model is what we call enterprise, and that allows you to create unlimited processes, and that is also unlimited users. By the way, the per process license model As you continue to buy, so expense reports work out so well that you want to now do a quality review process. So you buy another process for that. And that works out so well that you want to do employee onboarding, so you buy another process for that. Eventually, after you buy, I think it's 5 processes, you're converted automatically over to the enterprise license. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of walk before you run. But regardless, each license is unlimited user server-based licensing.
Okay, and our next question is, how are the reports generated?
I'm not sure what reports we're talking about there. If you're talking about any of the key performance indicators or the dashboards or those sort of things, those are all done with native SharePoint functionality. So Winshuttle has some very, very rudimentary reporting capabilities. It's so basic that most of our customers don't even use it. But because all of the data that is in the form and in the workflow and in the history and in the audit trail is stored in SharePoint, you can use SharePoint capabilities. So SQL reporting services, Excel services, dashboards, those sort of things. If that isn't the sort of reports you were talking about, just shoot us an email or another question and we'll try to narrow it down a little bit.
Okay, and does Winshuttle workflow have any out-of-office delegations?
It absolutely does. It has out-of-office delegation, and the out-of-office delegation is not a global setting. So in other words, you don't say, well, I'm sorry, it can be. You can say for every process that comes to me, delegate it to this guy. Or you can get more granular, and you can say only processes of this type delegate to this guy, and processes of that type delegate to this girl. So you can either set it for everything, or you can kind of get down into the nitty-gritty and say these processes go to this person, these processes go to that person. Maybe some processes don't get delegated to anybody. They have to wait till you come back. But that is built-in capabilities of the product.
Perfect. And the last question is, does this, what version of SharePoint does this run on?
2003, 7, and 10, and it runs on all of the flavors, so WSS or Foundation, that's the free version, Standard or Enterprise. The capabilities that I showed are identical with all of those versions.
Perfect. And it looks like that is all of the questions that we have for today. I'm going to throw up my contact information. Let's see, make sure you can see my screen. And if there is any questions that you may have, feel free to call me. My name is Teresa. My phone number is right there on the screen, also with my extension number and my email address. Like Derek said, if there's any questions that you have, or if you want to revisit the demonstration that we provided today for more of a customized demonstration, we would be more than happy to do so. We'd like to thank everybody for your time today, and have a great day on behalf of Adaptive Corporation and also Winshuttle Workflow. Thank you.